Where do we start if we're going to change the world? I'm going to ask you to go back in time, because what I'm going to look at is how we got to where we are today, okay? So if you go back in time, there was a time, some of you won't remember this, but I'm a bit older than you, so I probably do, where almost all people did what they were told by somebody senior to them, which was obviously to some extent their parents, but the other people who were in charge of the world at that time were people like kings and princes and emperors and generals and people like that, that you just obeyed. You did what you were told to do. Some of you may have had that kind of experience a little bit in your own childhood, where somehow you did what your parents told you to do, what other senior people told you what to do. That's their story. Now, it was a great deal more so in the old days, because people didn't travel much, they lived in the same community, and if your father was a farmer, and you followed, you were almost certainly to be a farmer, because you just didn't move around like we do today. So it was fairly predictable what your life was going to be, and it was fairly well determined by people outside your family, by, whoever told you you did it, okay? So we were controlled to a large extent by adults who had more power than us. Do you see that in history, that we were more like that? And that, of course, is very different today, because people have much more choice in their life. There's much more variety. People are traveling much more. There's many more things that they can do today, okay? And what was lost by that? We need to consider that also. Something is lost in that way. And I'm going to just take you back to my childhood, when I was born 3 years before the start of World War II. And my father was in charge of what we called the Home Guard at that time for the southeast area of England where we were living. And my mother was in charge of the Red Cross. And they were in uniform for 18 hours a day, and I didn't see them. They just were not there. They were looking after the people. We were living 4 miles from Tilbury Docks, which was very heavily bombed during the war. But it was very interesting, because my parents were both completely dedicated to serving humanity, because that's what people did in World War II. And when World War II was over, and I sort of started to meet other children, because there were no children in that area of Essex other than me and my sister, because they had all moved up to Scotland because it was safer. But my father wanted to keep us with him, and probably hoping we were going to get bombed or something. But then when I sort of was beginning to grow up then, people were talking about money. And I thought, well, what's money all about? I thought the purpose of life was about, service to humanity. And I didn't understand this thing about money. And actually, I've never really got over that. I've always felt that the purpose of life was really for humanity. And now, an awful lot of people think the purpose of life is to make as much money as you can, especially if they're bankers. They have that disease very badly. But it's extraordinary to me that when there was a crisis, which was World War II, how everyone at that time wanted to serve humanity. In those days, if you wanted to sort of show your ego a little bit, you might have put some steel garden fence a little bit, looked nice steel, maybe even had some brass on it that looked like gold. And didn't cost very much, but it made your house look a little bit nicer. And that was what they used to do in those days. Today, people buy Rolls Royces and things like that instead, but they had more sense in those days. What I want you to do is to take you a little bit further back than that and say that there was a very big change that somebody has already mentioned, and that is the time of the Industrial Revolution. This was about various different arguments about when it started, but I mean, it was before 1800. It was before that the Industrial Revolution began. And but what happened, what was so important at that time, is that we found coal and oil. Now, prior to that time, you had what energy you had locally. Everything was local. But suddenly, humanity had unlimited coal and oil, or they thought it was unlimited. It was not unlimited, as we now know, but everyone believed at that time there's all the coal in the world, there's all the oil in the world, and we can get rich. And that's what happened. What happened was we had all that energy, we built railways, we built steel ships, we built bridges, all sorts of things happened at that time, and everyone felt, and they were, in fact, more wealthy at that time. So it was a very appealing time at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It was the beginning of the disaster, because what happened was we got more and more enamored by just having more stuff. We could manufacture all this new stuff, and we got this disease of having to acquire more stuff. And that's what people did. They just wanted to buy more stuff. And of course, we developed a disease called capitalism. Adam Smith was once described as the creator of capitalism. And Adam Smith said, when the rich have enough in their cup, it will overflow and run over to the people who don't have enough. And that's how it is a fair system. Adam Smith was more mature than most of the banking or financial service people are today, because that's what he thought. It doesn't happen like that. Now we know that those who get very large bonuses are very happy to have very large bonuses, and they don't really care if there are other people in England and other countries who are starving. So I don't want to be bringer of bad news, but I'm just saying we have to recognize that the Industrial Revolution was a very big change that took place. Okay? The thinking of humanity changed at that time, and it changed education. It had a very big impact on education because we thought we could engineer our way to utopia. We felt that this is it. We've now found coal and oil, and this is it. This is the future. Okay? What happened to education? We focused on engineering or production of more stuff. We focused on knowledge. Okay? Knowledge is quantitative. Wisdom is what we need to use the knowledge responsibly. But we changed our education. We focused right over onto knowledge, and it was quantitative education. And the old form of wisdom, which is the oldest story in the world, it's the storytelling of wise people to the young people. It used to happen with grandmothers and grandfathers sitting around the campfire, telling stories, metaphorical stories to their children, that the children had to interpret. And that was the way wisdom came to young people in those days. But that stopped. We focused on knowledge, and wisdom got just pushed on one side. Today, we have an economic crisis. Today, we have an environmental crisis. Absolute lack of wisdom on human behalf. We create that problem. Absolutely created by the financial services people and the lack of governments are paying attention to the environmental situation. And we're in a mess. And the mess is a lot more worse than they're telling you, but I'm not going to go into that in great detail. I'm just saying that we have a very serious problem with our education system because we're not giving them the people skills that they need, which is the wisdom and the people skills. The qualitative skills are not coming into education. It's all about knowledge, passing your exams and that sort of thing. And I am very passionate about dramatic change in education. I'm happy to be speaking here in this academy. I'm on the trustee of 4 different charities that are working with children. And it's a very serious situation we have today in that particular world that we are creating. And education is the hope of the future. We have to take the young people in our world to a higher level of consciousness than we have in our banking system. I'm sorry, if those of you who are bankers feeling uncomfortable, you can please leave the room if you feel uncomfortable. But that is a very serious, concerning issue that we need to help schools with. Okay, now I want to say one other thing about schools, and this did come up this morning. Several people mentioned it, but I want to take it a bit further. And I'm going right back into history of evolution now. There are many models of evolution, and obviously Maslow is an example that some of you know, and they put it in a sequence of things that happen. In Maslow's case, it's if you don't have enough, there's a sequence of things you go through. The spirodynamics, which is a very complicated one. I'm going to give you a very, very simple one. And that is, let's just look at a child. When the child is first born, they are dependent on their parents, aren't they? For food and all that sort of thing, their parents tell them what to do. They are dependent on their parents. Okay? Then you know the terrible twos. Did you behave badly in the terrible twos, or did your child? Do you know what I mean by the terrible twos? When the mother says do this and the child says no, that's the terrible twos. What the child is doing is trying to see if they have any power in the world. And the answer is no, most of the time, unfortunately. Okay, the next time that happens is at adolescence, yes? When the child starts to rebel against parents, when they're adolescents. I'm going to suggest something quite alarming now and say that adolescence, we believe that people are adolescent all over the world. And that this is something that happens at that age. I'm going to suggest that adults create adolescence in their children. And it's so common that it's regarded as a universal disease, that people just have it. So what I'm going to just say now a little bit is about how this can be dealt with. And that is that if you are a mother and your child says, I want to go out and play. You know, they won't say that very well at 2 years old, but just imagine they imply that they want to go out and play. Now, most mothers or most parents are going to say, well, you need to put on a sweater, it's cold. Mistake number 1. Allow the child to go out and feel cold. Because the child will very quickly say, I'm cold, Mum. Mum will say, what do you want to do? Well, I want to put on a sweater or something. Because there's 2 things here so important. That is the capacity of young people to have a choice and learn from experience the consequence of the choice they make. So if I choose to go out and play and it's cold, I know that there's a relationship between going out and playing when I'm 2 years old and being cold. That relationship between the choice and the consequence is absolutely vital for young children. Sadly, we boss children around too much. We tell them what to do too much, and they do not learn the relationship between the choice that they make and the consequence. If you don't give them enough choices, but let's look at it the other way. If you brought up your child and you gave your child 3 choices each day, in 1 year alone, they will have made 1,000 choices and had 1,000 experiences of the consequence of the choice that they made. The learning that comes with a child relating the choices they make to their consequences is absolutely vital and totally missed out by parents, unfortunately, and schooling. Now, when it's a question of whether you wear a sweater or not when you're 2 or 3 years old, it's not a serious consequence. But if you move forward till their child is now 14, it's very different, because now there would be temptations to have drugs, carry knives, join gangs, steal things. All those things will be tempting. If you haven't had the experience of the choice and consequence, you will do the wrong things very often when you're offered drugs and all those things later on. And this is a very, very big problem today. Classic example of this is traffic safety. The amount of fatalities of young men between 18 and 22 from driving in the whole world is very high. They are they're the highest group of surveyed groups to have fatalities or to cause fatalities. If those children had had the opportunity from their parents or from their schooling to make choices frequently, by the time they start to drive a car, they would have probably made 10,000 choices with 10,000 consequences to learn from. And so when they are at a party and they've had too much to drink and somebody else comes and says, "Oh, will you take me home?" They say, "No, I've had a drink. I don't want to do that." This is, I think, one of the most serious failings in the whole of the education system, I would say worldwide, is the inability to get children to take self-responsibility. Now, I'm going to take it right back to evolution. When we started, we were dependent. Then we have reached a stage where we needed to become independent. And that's what a child is trying to do when they're 2 years old, when they have this rebellion at 2 years old, and that's what they're doing when they're adolescent. We must give them self-responsibility earlier, because that is the next stage of human evolution when we move from dependence to independence. And the profession of coaching came alive because of the recognition of the urgent need to get people to become more self-responsible. That's why coaching exists. I'm not talking about sports coaching. That's old-fashioned telling people what to do. But the modern workplace position is all about getting people to recognize that they must be more responsible in their life. And that's what the whole purpose of that is all about. And that's why coaching came alive and has been enormously successful, because that is the need today. So it's a massive task we have to bring that in. And I'm being quite challenging and sort of unusual with this story, and I don't want to go any more about it, but to say, I believe very much that this is a very, very important thing about education, not only about education, but it is of the development of humanity. The third stage of humanity developing in this very simple three-stage model is interdependence. That means we are all dependent on each other. We are all dependent on helping each other with whatever needs there are. And that is not a competitive system, it's a cooperative system. And that is where we are evolving to, and that is where we have to reach as soon as possible. Humanity has got blocked in this selfish, greedy, middle part of that evolution. We've got to get to stage 3 if we are going to deal with the global issues that we have to deal with collectively. We cannot do that with the competitiveness that there is in humanity at this moment. So that may sound funny when I'm here to talk about coaching in a sense, but coaching is the only profession that I know that its number one product is getting people to take self-responsibility. And that is what evolution has to do right now. I think we are in a very exciting, challenging time right now. We are being given the option to wake up and to become mature as we can be. Whether we do that now or whether we don't is our choice, and we need to have responsibility for the future. I personally am very optimistic that this crisis time is actually waking people up enough, and I'm optimistic about the future, although I'm giving you some bad news now, okay? All right, so I'll end there. Thank you.